Well, here's an interesting one I can show you. It's an article that came out in a professional magazine and online during Black History Month, which was just last month. I was going to put it out during Black History Month as a debunk, and I just had a few other things going on. Anyhow, regardless, what you see here is somebody that looks like a barista with her blue long hair, and she's handing coffee to someone else that just ordered it here on her laptop, sitting down, and yeah, so Caucasians. And there's something bad about it because, well, it even tells you right there by my pointer, it's Black History, money, and shake my head. Is coffee racist? How drinking coffee perpetuates white supremacy. Oh yeah, it gets sad and sickening. You can chalk this up to another false black claim for something that they did or had any involved with or even knew the people existed, such as ancient Egypt and so on, or even the Nubians they try to claim, which aren't related to them, or any Horners whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they're not kin to the Khoisan really either, or pygmies. But I guess that's for other topics here. Written in smaller print too, shown here, it says it was created by black people for black people, and now a pillar of white supremacist capitalism. And if you consume coffee, you're helping an industry built on racism. There was another article in this same magazine that said that if you use any of the objects that they talk about, that you're a racist white supremacist, and started trying to mention black inventions, which every single one of those are debunked. But in one case, the person did actually put a patent out for it, but that's not what even they tried to credit him for, so it really came across as odd. But in seeing that one, before I even had a chance to think about doing it and going through all the debunks, another channel had already done it. If you consume coffee, you're helping an industry built on racism. This is wewas coffee and shit. How strange. Can you imagine if something was put out? Some of these people are just so unaware of reality that they can't keep from doing something like this and showing their outward racism. Created by black people for black people. It wasn't created for anybody else to have. We're not sharing it all. We're mad now. You took our coffee. Can you imagine any Caucasian saying chicken was domesticated by Caucasians for Caucasians and you can't have any chicken anymore? Our beef, our pork, our 99.7% of all the vegetables we eat. Can you imagine? It really shows a blatant unself-awareness in a modern time where we're in what we professionally call the age of pandering. We end up having this situation where once you give them an inch, they try to make up all kinds of silly little things. In fact, here we have one claiming that coffee was created for black people, and then whites took off with it, and they love our coffee somehow, and that's white supremacist capitalism. And if you consume coffee, you're helping an industry built on racism. I don't know if any of y'all have ever done any research whatsoever on anything. Sadly, one place that I'll look quite often, because there are accurate articles, believe it or not, despite what you are always told whenever something doesn't necessarily go with the narrative. And strangely, people don't question the narrative versus what the actual thing says. If you go down to the bottom of every wiki article, there are people in there that you can click on and look at and research. You can search for it, and then you can research through things and get all kinds of information out of it, but you can also validate what they're saying. And so then all of a sudden you have to question the validity of the person saying the other point of view. And if it's really concerning for you or doesn't prove itself, you should go farther and farther and farther with it. Until a point of satisfaction. In fact, you should actually go farther than that point too. Sometimes, I quite often do in my research, and when I do, I may not find out something that's about this current topic, but about something else that leads to a connection. And that makes a whole large difference in many cases whenever we're looking at ancient people and connectives and things like that. But something that you can do, as I said, real easy, is just go someplace like Wiki. For I went to DuckDuckGo and I typed in coffee. Now this is as simple as it can be, and third or fourth down on this was actually reference in Britannica, and then right below that was the reference in Wikipedia. And I said, well, let's go, because I've already looked at something like this, I don't know, 10 years ago. Saw a thing not too long ago with people trying to connect it to it and everything. But coffee is a beverage prepared from roasted coffee beans. It's darkly colored, bitter, and slightly acidic. Coffee has a stimulation effect on humans, primarily due to its caffeine content, and has the highest sales in the world market for hot drinks versus a cold drink, And seeds of the coffee plant's fruits are separated to produce roasted green coffee beans. It's not from the wood or anything like that. The beans are roasted and then ground into finer particles and are typically steeped in hot water before being filtered out, producing a cup of coffee. You see, if you eat the coffee grounds, I don't know if any of you have made the mistake before, but it usually tries to upset your stomach some. And there's a variety of ways that you can make it: espresso, French press, cafe latte, or pre-brewed canned coffee. Sugar substitute, milk and cream are often used to mask the bitter taste or to knock it off. Some people like their coffee to where it just takes the edge off the bitterness. Other people will put in 1 or 2 more tablespoons of sugar to give it another effect, although a lot of people in ancient times were putting honey in there and different things. And it was also, strangely, coffee's got a strange bitter flavor to it to a lot of people. It's something you have to get used to. But in that effect, it used to be used as medicines also for people. And in fact, to this day, it's still hooked up with aspirins, and you'll find out that there's caffeine, well, not coffee, but there's caffeine hooked up with that, which has a synergistic effect working with both together, and it helps out in the situation. And it's the incredible pharmaceutical knowledge, I guess if you'd say. Let's get this over here a little bit. And so this coffee is a global commodity, and it has a long history, which we'll talk about in just a second, but tied closely to food traditions around the Red Sea. So over there in Egypt, in between Egypt and what we call Yemen today, or Saudi Arabia, blah, blah, blah. From the mid-15th century in Sufi shrines, where coffee seeds were first roasted and brewed in a manner similar to current methods. So they'll only give credit back to the 15th century on this, and people of having done this. But then there's some knowledge that goes with this, and some things that look like it has to do with coffee from before, and they've agreed on some, but they won't agree on the rest of them until they get more information, and it never gives more information, or you never can quite, at this point, attain it. Anyhow, the Yemenites, which this is not Yemenites of today, these are people called the ancient Sabaeans, like the Queen of Sheba, and the Caucasians that were living there at the time. Although the people that are there are Caucasians now, they have a mix to them and so on. But there's 2 kinds of coffee. There's Robusta which is a robust plant, not necessarily the flavor, but grown in certain situations, in certain places, and in certain soils, just like teas. You end up getting a special flavor out of it that people have really liked or enjoyed. And then the other popular one is Arabica, which contains the word Arab, so that might be giving you a little more hints to where this actually comes from. But Yemenis procured the coffee beans from an Ethiopian highlands via coastal Somali intermediaries and began their own cultivation. And by the 16th century, the drink had reached the rest of coastal Somali intermediaries and in the Middle East and North Africa, later spreading to Europe. And in the 20th century, coffee became a global commodity through the spice trades and all of that, creating different coffee cultures around the world. And so its spread and use by all the people was actually done by the spice trades and the trades in what you would think of as the Silk Road over water, if you will, in most cases, but it also did go the other way. We'll get into that deeper here, but the two most commonly grown coffee bean types are Arabica and Robusta. Coffee plants are cultivated in over 70 countries now, primarily in the equatorial regions, Americas, Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. And as of 2018, Brazil cultivated in over 7 countries, primarily the equatorial regions, and they create 35% of the world's coffee. Green unroasted coffee is traded in agricultural commodity, so it's sold, as just like they would do beans or anything else, but it's got a decent price on it somewhat. Despite sales of coffee reaching billions of dollars worldwide, farmers producing coffee beans are disproportionately live in poverty. Critics of the coffee industry have also pointed to its negative impact on the environment and clearing of land for coffee growing and water use, that they have to use up so much to keep these plants going and so on. So it can be pretty difficult, but then again, you have to find a place that's lush somewhat or on the edge of lush and has a lot of water to it, so you don't have to be putting in all that type of extra into it, or it really isn't making very much money at all, They pretty much live in poverty, but that's not what was said in the very first of it. So I'll give you a little thing on the etymology here. The word entered in the English language in about 1582 via the Dutch in a word called coffe, borrowed from the Ottoman Turkish coffe. Now the Dutch and Germanics have this V to W situation, like in the old Star Trek movies, and he asks where his nuclear vessels are. Or perhaps in Indiana Jones, whenever he sees the lady there and she's talking in that, and he says, I can guess where you're from because you're rolling over all those wewas. So there's a variation from that, but that was also borrowed in turn from the Arabic kahwa. Medieval Arab lexicographers traditionally held the etymology of kahwa meant wine, giving its distinctly dark color and derived from the verb kaya, to have no appetite. So that's kind of where it comes from. The beans are known as something different than the drink itself, though. Like you would think of coffee beans and then your coffee, and so you have to say the word bean on the end of it. They don't do that themselves because there's a word known as Bantu, or bun, and this is the plant itself versus the coffee, or kawa. So, and coffee pot and coffee break only originated in 1705 for coffee pots and 1952 respectively for a coffee break, of course, and things. I don't know why they had that in there, but gotta do it. So here they'll tell you something that actually goes against what they had said before, but there were all kinds of virtues of this drink known. And in 1583, Leonard Walloff, a German physician, gave the description of coffee after returning from a 10-year trip to the Near East, and he called it a beverage as black as ink, useful against numerous illnesses, particularly those of the stomach. Its consumers take it in the morning, quite frankly, in a porcelain cup, that is passed around from each other, and which each one drinks a cupful. It's composed of water and the fruit from a bush called Bantu. So this has connections to that too. But so far we're realizing that these people are Yemenites and Horners of Africa. So the statement is done from a black person in America, which is a Bantu, and they didn't even know that Yemen or any of these things existed, but they're claiming it. Now, it's a terrible thing, but in a modern day, you'll find blacks trying to claim anybody that has a tan or darker. And in fact, in a lot of situations, it's not even somebody that has a tan at all, because they've claimed Shakespeare, that they were the original Vikings, that they are the original Japanese people, basically anybody but themselves. And it's actually so self-exposing that they should have quit a long time ago. But just like the fact that they can't realize that calling it white supremacy and doing all this stuff and claiming it was only made for blacks, and they can't see that tree for the forest of all the lies that they put out, so they're just fine with it. They're hoping some of this sticks to the wall, I guess. I don't know. But so eventually there's spice trades and stuff. By the 16th century or late 1500s, it reached Persia, Turkey, and North Africa. And the first coffee seeds were smuggled out of the Middle East by a Sufi Baba Budan to Yemen to India. And so they had that. Now, there are stories in India where they have, predating this by far, as drinks, but they actually realized that that was soma, which actually has narcotics all in it and stuff, and that's not necessarily it. Although the one thing that they talk about that can be used as separate that's not in soma might be something like that, but a lot of people say in most of these cases, if not all, they're talking about tea there. But tea also has a diuretic effect and caffeine in it too, and so on too, so it's kind of their version of it, or so on, or something similar. But they of course like coffee, tea, all kinds of exotic drinks. And there's mocha. Mocha is historically imported for up to 2/3 of their coffee from Berbera-based merchants. So Berber-based merchants, before the coffee trade of mocha was captured by British control and in the 19th century. Therefore, much of the Ethiopian coffee was exported to Aden via Berbera. So I'm realizing that the white people of England and stuff were not using this stuff, but they're also the people that took it around the world and made it real popular. And now the countries that come from originally and others that are growing it now are making a large amount of money off of it. But then again, it also says that, hey, they're really living in poverty pretty much, because there's all of this competition and so on and everything. And then there's three people in the middle of it and all this. The Dutch East India Company was the first to import coffee on a large scale. Dutch later grew the crop in Java and Ceylon. The first exports of Indonesian coffee from Java in the Netherlands occurred in 1711. I don't know if you've tried any of these different coffees, like say an Ecuador coffee or Colombian coffee versus so-and-so. A lot of these places actually buy it from multiple places, and kind of like a bourbon or whatever, they end up blending them together to get a blend that's a certain flavor. A lot of people realize that. There's certain coffees that have a strong flavor in one direction, and they just want some of that added to it, so they'll have small percentages of that added into it and so on. Just like you end up add some Turkish tobacco in with your other, and it has a little more pipe tobacco effect or flavor to it. But a general resolution among many Americans was to avoid drinking tea following the Boston Tea Party and after the War of 1812, during which Britain temporarily cut the tea imports that was going on there, and was already going in the Americas somewhat, but we preferred our tea just like British do and so on. we ended up finding a hankering or a taste for coffee. So that would be in modern days, and I don't want to talk about all the countries that have it and everything else nowadays, because that's not where it actually comes from. But if you look at this map here, I guess, to say these are all the countries that you can currently find it in at this date, and up into the Americas there, it's barely out of screen on your left. But if you look, it's not even really in Ethiopia anymore. Yemen doesn't get enough water to really sustain it. It's only a portion or a band through India that has it, Indonesian islands that are used for it and so on there. Madagascar I've had before and so on. So it's not even grown where it originally came from, and we're kind of lucky that we got a hold of the plant and spread it around the way that we did, because it may have died off, for it would have only been a few seasons of real droughts or stuff going on in Yemen and Ethiopian highlands, and it would have been pretty much knocked out. So good timing on that. This is where it's grown today though. But the person that wrote this article is a person from over in here, and they didn't know or not related to anybody that lived over here. And when we look at it through the facts that we have, it looks like it was grown from over here and on the Horn. They have trouble saying where it comes from back and forth. One of the stories that we have that conspicuously show that it comes from earlier and in Yemen over here on this side is actually a farmer who had said that whenever his animals go out where this whole area is, there's a lot of them, they're nipping around on the plants, whenever they started eating these, they would all get frisky and hop around and kick and do stuff and get all active. And somehow he got up the nerve to try it, and it probably tastes like crap, which coffee kind of does. But then in the fact of roasting them and then splitting them open and letting them soak, and what they used to do before they had the modern day, in fact, the modern day is built out of percolation, and what they actually would do is boil these in pretty much like a soup and then strain it out. And then you can add things to it, but the caffeine that's there is there. So when you say that it was made for black people, for black people, it never really took off on them in any way, shape, or form, although now, and in fact in that article it'll show you a picture of a guy that's a Bedouin who's not even really black and drinking coffee, and then she's like, see, and it's like, you're not related to those people and didn't know they existed either. Why do you keep trying to claim things? Well, most of us realize it's out of jealousy and really a lacking point on that, and they can't get over that. So we end up having to endure situations like this. But you can simply Google something and end up finding a lot of information about it, the way things are done and so on. Oh, here's people trying different mixes and blends of coffee. Look, they have dark skin, so we did this. And it's like, those people are Ethiopians and you're not related to them. In fact, until the modern day, you didn't even know that they existed. You probably ought to stop, because you're trying to pimp yourself out and make claims. And what's hilarious is these people in Ethiopia and even the dark-skinned people in Egypt and so on that are there now that never were before, of course, keep telling you that they're not related to us, and they need to quit trying to claim they're us, because they try to run us over the boat, and then they try to claim it wasn't even them, it was us. Quite often. So here's some coffee grounds, and of course you can get Folgers and so on, and I've got a dark roast in there that's pretty damn decent. But and tells you ways that they decaffeinate, and of course modern brewing and everything like that. That's pretty neat. But let's look at something else here real quick and give you another look at this here. Now I tried to find Egyptian coffee makers, because if they're saying that this happened around the 1500s, then you have this guy that was apparently around 1100 or so, who had this cattle that went around and did this thing, and it spread from there, if you will. By the way, there's another story that a sultan did something, and he wanted to stay up, and somehow magically the tree started doing it or something, I don't know. But if you look here, it's just a side note. We're looking at bongs here, and they're showing these bongs here, and it's got a opium poppy over here on the side of it and so on. So is this really a bong? Well, you can bong that too, but yeah, it's a bong. And in fact, they're showing you here, archaeologists discovered 2,400-year-old solid gold bongs made by the Scythian people. In the pictures here, they show them with gold hair made of gold. Scythians. Another article on it, high on history, gold bongs, the ancient horse lords who toped. Gonna have to do one of those for coming up on 420 Army. And they tried to show that Egyptians had this oldest bong thing or whatever, but this is actually telling in a different way. This is Sumerian beer and the way that it's done, even the straw and reed, the way that it works is going on here. And of course, this is supposed to be the Egyptians here with the hieroglyphics behind them. But all these Scythian stuff that's showing on, and then they have these, well, of course, there's modern bongs like this, but then there's hookahs like this, and they have multiple chords going on so everybody can party out or whatever. By the way, Herodotus talks about the Scythians even doing this, but he had it all wrong. The way the whole bong works, the whole thing, the fact that they would burn the seeds of the plant, that doesn't even get you a buzz or anything. Get you a headache and make you be sterile. So you don't even do it that way. And he acted like they would get in a small tent and a hot box, but they would just go in there to smoke out and come out, kind of like Spicoli. But there's a whole lot of direct inhaling going on in that situation. But I'm trying to find this one thing because I had trouble finding it earlier, and I'm like, well, look here, no, okay, well, look here, oh, here we go. Oh, wow, it's all the stuff about the Scythians. But if I get down to a point here, I'm going to show you an Egyptian bong. And I'm sure that I'm already past it, but there should be all coming up. Okay, so even in a modern day, this is the way a hookah looks that's here. But this is like one to do hash or something because it's only got one little hole and no little bitty holes around it to suck all the way through. And you're supposed to get this hot and then put it on top of it, and it burns, and as it does, you suck it through. And of course, there's a tube on the bottom of that, just like there are in these hookahs and so on. But kind of a terrible picture, but here's other ones too. And what are those? Well, they're large hookah bowls. And what's funny is I did a video about this a few years ago on 420, and where they actually had it in exhibit, and they said this was a coffee strainer, and that they would put it over a cup or something and then put coffee beans that are roasted on there and then keep pouring it through. Well, the thing is it looks like the Egyptians did have something like that, but they would use a piece of linen or percale linen, a fine linen, to sift it back out of. Just like you'd also pour, people talk about going through cheesecloth and so on. That's that gossamer fabric of old, like percale, but it's one layer. It's fairly thin, see-through somewhat, and they would pour that through that, just like whenever they poured their beer through it and things like that to help clearing it out and stuff, so on. And it's something that was used up until a modern day, until we have coffee filters and stuff that goes on. But they had the coffee thing here, and they had these little stems that are there, but they didn't have the bong. Well, when you go over here, and this is in the old Egyptian place, not the new one, so I don't even know where it is at this point in the new one, from watching people's tours online and so on. But a couple of things over, they've got this drink and this thing and this spouts here, but it just stops short and it's got a cut off hole on it. And it's like, that's where that stem goes into. And they acted like it was for tea drinking and so on. And it's like, are you going to say tea drinking is 1350 BC in Egypt? That's weird. They've got this, study card here put out there, and it says it on it. And, the tape's starting to yellow on it and so on. But these are supposed to be some type of coffee sieve. But what this is a bong. So they end up, coconara hookah bowls are here, but they have a whole bunch of them in that, and so that shows that they were actually smoking out and doing whatever, and that it isn't actually strainer for coffee, but they had other things that they used to strain and do so on. But then worse than that, there's something of the Acadians, which would end up actually being in BC times for sure, where they talk about using a recipe of something that seems like coffee, but it's used like this, inside of a bowl, inside of another bowl, and that they would sit and boil that and then strain it out. But then what they do is they cook it down apparently to concentrate it, and then use that as a magic elixir used for certain things. And again, it helps with headaches and so on too. In fact, there's another story in the ancient Sumerians where they're talking about using a certain artifact, and whenever they do, not artifact, medicine, and whenever they do, just like before, whenever it said, this one says, I don't have any appetite, the other one is used for people whenever they're constipated. And I don't know if you ever drink coffee and it makes you want to go, but just mentioning that effect with it. But then also, that's supposed to be given regularly to the Chaldean astrologers at night, and people that are shepherds by night use this also, and that it makes them not want to eat. Now, that sounds like something very much like caffeine, and it sounds very much like coffee, but because they don't have enough connectives to it, they can't actually say that that was coffee here, that was coffee there, and so on like that. And if they did, then they're saying the ancient Sumerians went all across here, but also found these plants and made something out of it and so on. Of course, there could have been coffee around there and it petered out for one reason or another a long time ago. A lot of other opportunities for it. But one thing's for sure, coffee wasn't made by black people for black people. And the reason that we have coffee today in the world is because of Caucasians too. So this is just another one of those claims. And again, I ask you now, if I was to turn around and tell you that chickens were made and domesticated by Caucasians for Caucasians, what kind of reaction do you think we'd get out of them? Are we supposed to have the same reaction to them, or is this supposed to be playing in a one-sided game, or you want to let them just go on and keep believing lies like this? How do you think this is supposed to work? Ooh, there's a picture I want to use. So I don't know what you think about this, but is it racist to end up saying something's created for them, or that it's all part of white supremacy because one people was going around the world doing all kinds of things that the other wasn't involved with because they were still pre-Neolithic primitives? You think if we took the people from Irian Jaya and took the bone out of their nose and then all of a sudden slapped clothes on them and stuff, that within a few generations they would be trying to claim that they built everything from right there in Irian Jaya and that small spot too? Is this really a jealousy and envy problem that we really need to address, that people just let keep going on? I mean, it's flattering to mock somebody or to try to mimic them and so on, but then to turn around and claim it like we was in the Bible, we was in Egypt, we were the Moors, we were Shakespeare, we were. And you look into it deep enough and wow. Look up Aslar Man sometime and you'll find a radical truth on the way that goes. And then look at the ones that they even in that same article on Wiki mentioned that they found in the same area that were just prior to that. And now they're a small-brained hominid still existing, a Homo erectus type form still existing well after the last ice age, all the way up into about 4400 BC where Aslar Man shows up. but yet they claim that they were here for anybody and doing so on. Are they claiming Homo erectus? It's strange. I guess that's for other videos though, but hey, y'all like coffee? Well, you can give credit to ancient Yemenites and then the Caucasian people that started trading it all around and pimping it to everybody, so they ended up all liking it and making it tradition. In fact, the people that used to love tea so much drink a lot of coffee, especially in the mornings. It's like you might drink tea later, but in the morning you'll drink a cup of coffee. And I think it hits stronger than tea. Peace.